Zionism, Islam, and the West. Kerry Bolton. Postscript from the right. I write as unapologetically from the right of politics. Yet in recent years, there has been an odd situation. The nationalist right, hitherto in conflict with Zionism because of the inherent character of the doctrines, often now has not only an anti-Muslim position motivated by opposition to third world immigration, but also combines this with a growing sympathy for Israel. It is said that politics makes strange bedfellows. Well, this situation is downright perverse. It seems that often the swarthy and even black faces of many Muslims and fair complexions of many Israelis are sufficiently for the rightist Islam and Zionism. That many are being so easily befuddled by banalities is a symptom that some in the nationalist right do not know their ideological foundations. A dose of Francis Parker Yockey is required 3 times daily until cured, and the nationalist right can again understand that the USA, so far from being the leader of the Western world, is the bulwark of the West's cultural decay. Now I'm going to give a little pushback here because, yeah, that's pretty true. Not saying this just to defend everything about America, but a lot of what went down in England with the Anglo-Atlanticists and what goes on in Europe with its old money and the people in Europe that want to move towards egalitarianism, a lot of stuff that happened back in the French Revolution. We go back to Italy and the merchant class there, before the Jews even had power, with your Medicis and stuff, who started pulling from their Kabbalism, but were also moving to replace Christianity with humanism and the Greeks. It's not entirely the U.S. I'd say there's a lot of mimetic exchange in corruption here. And some of this takes a right-wing turn into fascism, rather than returning to God or what is true about God, which is not really the case Kerry Bolton is making for Islam, is it? Is our Western cultural heritage really that which excretes from Hollywood, MTV, Madison Avenue, and that which Yockey called ethical syphilis? Can't really argue with that one. And who is it that stands behind and in front of much of this social and cultural pathology? It is not Islam. Well, we can go find Muhammad Hijab advocating for pedophilia and owning child brides. It's not as if there aren't cases of rampant homosexuality and degeneracy that spread sometimes within Islam. Even if you can be punished and killed for it, it seems to break out there too. And they seem to have adopted it very fast for something that's supposedly the cure for liberalism and degeneracy. When I got into the propaganda our scumbag government was sending over to Iran and Syria with feminism, they actually adopted it very fast. Liberal Islam has spread very fast in a very short amount of time. You're just entering into modernity. And this stuff that what there's elements of truth in what Kerry Bolton wants to do, to have a country that enforces ethics for tradition. That's true. We should be doing that. But it's not. He's not really about that. It's just about stopping the Jews and then setting up a positivism, a religious positivism, not a logical positivism, a religious positivism that just looks at an extraction. We're going to see that when we get into Laban here, and there was classic liberals with this position, and you see some of them reach back to it and try to reassert it in the more old Hegelian manner, which was more conservative, more Straussian. This is where the neoconservative shit comes from. It's weak on where the ideas come from, or what the solution is. The solution that he offers is Antichrist. It's a false alternative, and what will inevitably be a syncretism of the traditionalist manly religion in subordination to the state to keep norms and to do everything. So if we look at what we talked about last time, how the dialectic that the West has put forth pushes extreme opposites, and then a more moderate synthesis is put forward. Well, here's the more moderate synthesis in the long game of a struggle session with the devil and the nihilist dialectic Fr Seraphim Rose talks about, that forces us away from God and forces us to take false conceptions of it to make it stop. It's the real struggle session. Do Muslims run the banks, publishing houses, newspapers, television networks, movie industry? They run some. They have their Al Jazeera, and they're coming over here. If you're going to swap them out, if you're going to swap out the Jews, you're going to get them. You're a fool if you don't think this. And Kerry Bolton says, well, let's be Nietzsche, he's going to get into, talked about it being impregnated by the swarthy races so we will be stronger. It's the same shit. Is it Muslims who provide the scriptwriters, songwriters, producers, directors, and financiers for the putrescence that is today called Western civilization? Our civilization has been terminally sick for decades. Yet there are those on the right whose outrage is directed at the wearing of the burqa, or even the headscarf, or the building of a mosque. Demonstrating against the building of a globalized fast food outlet will be of more relevance in defending Western culture and racial health. If Islam has been in decay for centuries from its position as a high culture, which introduced much of value into the Western civilization, then so too has the West. Those on the nationalist right who claim to stand for Western resurgence are not going to succeed by aligning themselves with the main architects of the West's cultural and social decay. Until recently, this was understood. The Arabs, with the inspiration of T.E. Lawrence, fought with heroism some crucial battles for the Entente during World War I, albeit betrayed as we have seen. World War II saw the forces of the Western renewal and Islam fighting common foes. As we have seen, the Arabs were not inclined towards Marxism, which was being infiltrated into the lands like a virus by Jewish Marxists and Marxist Zionists. It's also pushed in by Soviet Russia. Even when you talked about Stalin making it ethno-nationalist, he still wanted to push Marxism in his own manner, and some of them sided with that, less of them sided with it, but there are some that did, including the ones installed by the British. And now what are we seeing? MAGA Marxism. You're seeing lots of Muslims being willing to turn towards MAGA Marxism and to synthesize with this, especially here in America, and a lot of you on the American right are now Marxists. You're seeing this with Hinkle, Gage. Not all of them are Marxists, but some of them are, and it is spreading as a big movement, and there are people who are willing to either subordinate Islam to that, or Christianity, or fake Orthodox Christianity, and you can get the fuck out of our churches. We're not playing this game. So this isn't a completely honest point here. Now, they were more inclined to either side with the Western allies or the fascists. We won that battle, but actually the Nazis did have the greater number of allies, and that was because of the Western degeneracy and also the West siding with the Jews. So there's a lot of what he's saying here is true, but he's playing a one-sided game that cuts out a lot of the context and painting a bullshit romanticized picture here. When General Francisco Franco and the military rose against the Marxists and communists in Spain, at their side were Arab warriors. When a Republican plane bombed the Arab quarters in Tituán, Morocco, and the Arabs turned on the Spanish troops in mistaken belief that they had been responsible, the situation was resolved by the Grand Vizier, Sidi Ahmed El Ghanmiya. The first action of Franco on returning there was to confer the Grand Vizier with the Cross of San Fernando with laurels. A Moor was thus the first recipient during the Civil War of Spain's highest decoration, wrote historian Brian Crozier. Moorish troops were important in helping to liberate Oviedo in 1936. In 1937, a mixed force of Spaniards, Moors, fascist Italians took Milana. In 1939, Moors marched into Barcelona. Arab friendship with Frankish Spain remained during the time when the state was being ostracized. Moroccan and Egyptian dignitaries visited Spain at the time of the UN boycott. In 1952, Spanish Foreign Minister Martin Artejeu toured Amman, Cairo, and Baghdad. Just as the Entente owed the Arabs a debt for their assistance during World War I that was never repaid, so all Western Christendom owes the Arabs a debt for their help in defeating Bolshevism in Spain, in a struggle that saw churches burned and nuns and priests killed. Well, you also see Muslims burn and kill churches too, and priests and nuns and rape. And we talked about what goes on in Egypt right now with the forced conversion of females being captured. We see it over there in Pakistan too. So you're trading one for the other. And as soon as they stop needing our help and stop trying to pretend that we all believe the same thing and we're just allies, you're going to see what I've seen when we talk to these people on Twitter and stuff. The threats. We got saints like Daniel Soyev. He was shot right there in Moscow, which has a huge Muslim population. So, you're leaving part of this out. This is true, though, about the alliance, but it's not as though everything in Western culture came from Islam and we was all Muslims. They're trading the same kind of tactic the left uses here. We was all black. Everything came from the blacks. Everything, Just the Muslims. Western culture never made anything. This idea is stupid. There's been ebbs and flows in civilization and lots of mimetic exchange. And I would argue some of the problems that we have that broke out in the Renaissance that lead to these issues also came from the mixture of Islam with Christianity and Western Catholicism and the move towards the modalist collapse and natural theology and alchemy. There was a lot of currency back and forth. Byzantium was better able to keep it in check, and it also offered a lot of our modern day science and understanding and philosophy too, and we've completely lost it and cut it out of the picture. And we don't know shit about it. When Uber Boyo was doing the tough guy, black-pilled, pagan, fascist routine, he got skewered on this idea that Christianity was just a Jewish psyop and weak. And Byzantium was a key part here. And the West, after going into the problems of the Renaissance, that were in the Middle Ages that were leading up to it, the problems of scholasticism, putting the intellect a little bit too high, and using these Arab ideas and pulling from Avicenna and Averroes. Well, when they shut down the Platonist Academy with Gemestos Platon, and these ideas came over to the West, they had no response to it, and it slowly took over the ages. And then your Marxist ideas come from there just as much as they do from the Jews. And if any of you people actually want to have an honest, long-form debate about that with our apologists that understand this, you're going to get roasted. So you want to put up like little fake-ass online acts, how you're going to come in and demand a debate right that second, and then hide behind your platforms and act like tough guys. But they'll lose. You will lose. The facts do not support you. It doesn't matter. This is completely left out right here. The Muslims in fascist Italy were able to work in accord in developing Italy's African colonies. Mussolini was looked upon as a protector of Islam. In Tripoli, Libya, in 1937, Mussolini received the Sword of Islam with a sense of deep honor. In East Africa, the Italian administration officially recognized Muslim holidays and encouraged the building of schools and mosques. The Muslim courts were recognized. Louis Diel, a journalist touring East Africa, was told that Muslims were deeply loyal to Mussolini and said that they owed him much. Our fellow believers throughout the world know that too. As Mussolini has high regard for us, so may he count on us too. The historian Dennis Mack Smith, an anti-fascist, wrote that the fascist administrators in Libya, Somalia, and Eritrea did much that was good. They did much to control slavery, epidemics, and intertribal fighting. Inspired by the social nationalist doctrine of Italy, similar movements were formed by Arabs, white, gray, and steel shirt movements in Syria, blue shirts and green shirts in Egypt, tan shirts in Lebanon and Syria, white shirts in Iraq. The Syrian National Socialist Party remains a factor in Lebanon, and in the Arab struggle against Zionism. Well, let's take a little closer look, though. How about Mussolini and the fascism here? Well, Hitler got rid of a lot of masonry. But there was a lot of fascist masonry and neo-paganism and Julius Evola type ideas that are said to stop the Western corruption, but they line up with the belief systems and the Nietzschean ideas that are in the elites right now that have currency in these Epstein Islands and whatnot. And in these P2 fascist lodges, that is what the West targeted after the war. After we won the war, we used Lucky Luciano and the mob. Jay Dyer's lectures on this are amazing. But it's not just him. They're heavily sourced from multiple viewpoints. There's no way around the infiltration of the Vatican. That was done through the mob and through these P2 lodges of Masons that were fascist. They were fascist Masonic lodges. They liked Islamic ideas too and perennialism. It's not just Jewish. There's definitely this. I'm not denying. I'm very critical of the Zionist influence in our government and this corruption and the religion of the Pharisees when it comes to the actual hardcore Talmudic Jews and those who become secular, just like the rest of the West. And they're globalists and esotericists and dialecticians, as we talked about. And Zionism takes up a big part of this, but don't pretend it's not Islam too. Don't pretend it's not also this fascism. That is in a dialectic. It was used dialectically against the Marxism. The only thing you can do, these people can do, is come in with like has. Bitch, boy, I'm so tough. You don't even have a debate. You don't have a debate. They don't know what they're talking about and you're wrong. These people are there to shut down our conversation and keep us from talking because we're a threat to the elites more than you. if we were allowed to come out and talk. And you don't want us to because you want to be the solution. Some of these people would rather be somebody than actually stop this shit. After World War II, Arab and European nationalists collaborated in opposing Zionism. The German war hero Otto Skorzeny, who had led the rescue of Mussolini from communist partisans, taught Palestinian refugees guerrilla warfare and remained a close friend of the Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat. Now, people will kind of talk about Skorzeny sometimes on the right, but they're typically neocons and they want to just say Islamo-fascist. And they talk about that aspect in a negative manner. And the neocons and the Zionists will talk about Skorzeny in a pejorative manner. Bolton here is talking about Skorzeny in a romanticized manner. What they're both leaving out is that he worked with fucking Mossad. Mossad, just as he was allowed to leave the Western POW prison, they let him walk right out the fucking door before he went down to the Middle East to work with the Muslims and worked with Yasser Arafat, who was also replaced by Gaddafi and Skorzeny was still around there. He also advised the PLO group. That was a leftist type of group. So Bolton already talked about PLO being a leftist and secular movement. But we're going to stop it with right-wing fascism to stop that degeneracy. But they were advised by Skorzeny. And when he was captured by Mossad let him out and he worked for all sides on the Cold War. He worked with the Arabs. People he knew did, PLO group, and so did other types of Paladin group. Some of his men worked as mercenaries down in South and Central America, playing both sides of this, and they worked for Russia, and they worked for the U.S., and they worked for the Mossad, and they worked with the Arabs. So don't let these people bullshit you. There's not really any good side here. Major General Otto Remmer, harassed by the German state. And he was... If it wasn't him, there was people that he had trained and worked with that also worked on training some of these death squads that were Western-backed jihadism that we talked about in the previous chapter, America's Jihad. And there was some of this Nazi training that went on with Saddam's Republican Guard. That's why their eagle looks a lot like the Nazi eagle. And like I talked about, when I was in Iraq, we were there searching out for the Baathists in Al-Qarma, Western-backed, Nazi-trained with Western money. Because both sides of the Cold War used the Nazis. They were all gone waiting across the border to become what would be ISIS. That's why they were also so successful in dominating their enemies, because they were much highly trained and proficient. When we had to train Iraqis and work with them, they sucked, they were shitbags. Or they would be from a minority, from another province that hated Saddam's type of people and hated the Sunnis. But they were overzealous, and I only saw one unit that was actually good and kept disciplined, and it was because they had an actual Republican Guard commander, one of the only ones that remained. And he kept them in line, and they had a serious military discipline. So that superior force was Western backed, but it was Nazi trained, while Skorzeny worked for fucking Mossad and everybody else. So let's keep going. We went to Yasser Arafat. Major General Otto Remmer, harassed by the German state, served as a political advisor in Egypt and Syria for decades. Johannes von Leers, an expert on Zionism in the Middle East, at the German propaganda ministry, converted to Islam, which he had long admired, and advised the Egyptian Ministry of Information through arrangements with the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. There were many other veterans who received sanctuary from the Arabs and in turn assisted them after World War II in their conflicts with Zionist aggression. There were also many that were given sanctuary from us too and worked in our deep state for a lot of evil shit that's led to all this eugenics. It's like the movie Dr. Strangelove, where the FDR type president, who's kind of a pushover and socialist, has this Nazi doctor from the Rand Corporation there, and he's got the communist he lets in and kisses his ass the whole time and won't listen to the pro-American people. But in the end, they all seem to be on the same side about eugenics, transhumanism, killing off the world and going and living under a bunker where they could use Islamic ideas like polygamy for having 10 wives apiece. And the communist looks at Dr. Strangelove and says, I like the way you think. These people are all united together, even when they fucking hate each other. The French nationalist Dr. Christian Boucher, who has served with the supposedly anti-Muslim Front National and other movements of the nationalist right for many years, has commented, whoever browses the catalogs of nationalist bookstores, Whoever reads nationalist newspapers and magazines, whoever visits internet forums where young and not so young activists of the nationalist right express opinions, will immediately notice that rabid anti-Islamism reigns. The cause would seem clear. Islam is the enemy of the French nation and of European civilization, and therefore of the nationalist movement. But beyond the obvious and beyond appearances, is it reality? An objective approach to the facts calls for a reply in the negative. Islam was not always looked upon negatively by nationalists, and at present, hostility towards it is not absolute in the ranks of the committed rightists. Boucher states that the French right had been sympathetic towards the Arabs since the late 19th century. Gustave Le Bon, a leading influence on right doctrine, especially with his socio-psychological study of mass behavior and social revolt, The Crowd, 1895, wrote in his Civilization of the Arabs of the great cultural legacy that Islam had given to Europe. We must bear in mind that the Arabs and the Arabs alone are the ones who guided us to the ancient world of the Greeks and Romans. European universities, including the University of Paris, based their curricula on translations of their books for 600 years and used their methods of research. The Islamic civilization was one of the most amazing that history has ever known. If the Arabs had taken over France, then Paris would have become like Cordova in Spain, a center of civilization and knowledge, where the man in the street was able to read and write and even compose poetry at a time when the kings of Europe did not even know how to write their names. And again, what we just said about Byzantium applies here too, and the outbreak of the Greeks and the Greek revenge in the Renaissance. I would suggest you take a look at Fr Seraphim Rose's Orthodox Survival Course. And Le Bon here pulls very heavily in The Crowd on the French Revolution and the power of these ideas themselves, which is kind of being overlooked, and they wanted to be like the Greeks. He says at one point that him and Hippolyte Taine, the classic liberal historian he's pulling from, who has an excellent multi-volume work on the French Revolution, I'm going to get into this work on The Crowd. This work also, The Crowd also influences Jung, and it influences all the eugenics movements that are part of neo-fucking conservatism, like we got into. It's a eugenicist movement that's influenced by all this 19th century thought and the Prussianism. And this is all being left out here. For sure, though, the Zionism is a problem, but I think we can take a more nuanced look here. And in the French Revolution, they had the same aim of replacing the Christian tradition with a more Greek version of it that subordinates it and uses the Spinoza type ideas and the Gemistos Platon type ideas and a lot of occultism. Friedrich Nietzsche had commented, and then you get a kind of right-wing backlash to it that's still built on some of the same presuppositions. This is where Le Bon comes out of. I would recommend reading Le Bon's The Crowd, though. It's very insightful. Friedrich Nietzsche has commented on this also, writing of the wonderful culture of the Moors in Spain. A guy who was sodomized and got syphilis and died from it, and had all kinds of horrible and evil ideas. And said there was no objective reality, and also was very influential in postmodernism. And all these evil ideas at the World Economic Forum, very Nietzschean. Noah Yuval Harari is like fully Nietzschean. Anything that exists is good just because it exists. And it's strong. If it's strong, it wins. Everything becomes power. And to him, data is the most powerful thing, so we should all become data. Dataism. The data is more important than humans or abstract concepts about humans because it can assert more power. So it's the only real thing. It's a result of this relativism. Now we're going to see there's some legitimate cases here for things that the Arab world did contribute to us in the West and the world. But there's mimetic exchange. You see empires and peoples rise and fall, and all kinds of people have made contributions to the world and important discoveries. And there was definitely a period, where the Arabs had all the Greek knowledge and the West was in decline. But here's the thing. They completely leave out the advances of Byzantium and how all this stuff here that the Arabs did contribute when we get into scholasticism and the schism that was caused by the Arabs in the Western world between the West and the East Catholic churches. This gets us in a position where scholasticism takes over, and then a lot of esotericism comes out through alchemy, which is where a lot of these Arabs are getting this stuff from that we're about to see they discover. And this goes on before the Jews get in charge. So there's a lot of mimetic exchange between Hermetic ideas from Egypt, ideas from the Arabs, reasserting the Greeks, instead of keeping the Greeks in their place where they were defeated and refuted, but then everything that was true and the use of their language for Christian theology made them better, as you can see in the Filiocalia and whatnot, with the St. Gregory Palamas, Maximus the Confessor, St. John of Damascus. Instead of doing this, now you start to see the Greeks break out and we end up in humanism. This comes out of the Renaissance. In the Renaissance, a lot of the occultism starts to take the precedent here in old Europe, long before America, long before the British, long before the Jews got the upper hand. They get into Kabbalism because they want to look at worldly working systems that give us this fucking science here. Rather than waiting for these things with revelation and keeping the eternal perennial values to navigate such knowledge, the knowledge replaces the Christian paradigm and becomes the thing, and it becomes science and scientism. And we get empiricism out of this in the Enlightenment. And here is where the classic liberal ideas that we all have the same values take precedent, and all religions that just say they're traditional are good enough. So you'll see Bolton here wants to assert basically Enlightenment ideas and ideas of religious positivism that still end up back at the problem of their presuppositions and lead to all of this. The problem here, you'll see with these merchants that, like your Medicis and stuff, when they start moving the power, and then princes of Europe and Northern Europe start to see they can do the same thing, they take the power away from the church, but the church has gone through this problem of scholasticism. It's gone into Chiliasm, which is dispensationalism. That's where you get your Christian Zionism from, dude. Like, it's so short-sighted here. And it's so short of all the contributions, too, that we lost in the west of Byzantium. I mean, all the way when he selectively wants to kiss Russia's ass, well, I mean, everything that was good there before we shipped communism there came out of Byzantium. But in Byzantium, they could actually keep this stuff in its place. When it started getting out of hand with Gemestos Platon, who starts moving towards what would become Jacobinism and communism and Spinozaism and everything we're seeing with process philosophy, well, when Justinian shuts down the academy and these guys leave who are his students, that stuff spreads to the West. All the radicals from Byzantium spread to the West, the Barlamite ideas. This is where it all breaks out with humanism. And all these guys talk about the Greeks were so superior too. One minute we're cucks for not for allowing homosexuality to run rampant, but these Greek ideas are where that comes from when the Greeks are asserted over the Christian ideas. David Patrick Carey had a great debate with Uberboyo on this that just completely destroyed it. So does a lot of the Tom Holland stuff for the mainline about Christianity just being weak and these Greeks being so strong. But then these guys want to also uphold Islam 1 minute. Then they want to uphold paganism and Nietzscheism. And it's just whatever makes them the tough guys that get to have total control over society and take advantage of this chaos. Then it's Hinkle pretending to be Orthodox, but then he's also, a communist. It's complete incoherent bullshit. But now this guy who's unapologetically from the right, he's going to talk about how we was all retards until the Arabs came along, and the only reason we ever learn anything is the Arabs. There's valuable contributions here that are left out. There's great things about any society that has to actually function. They've engaged with the energies of God, but it doesn't mean their society is actually true. Babylon was a great empire too, and it fell. Arab chemists discovered sulfuric acid, aqua regia, nitric, potassium, sal ammoniac, silver nitrate, corrosive sublimate, and the chemical processes of distillation, sublimation, crystallation, coagulation, cupellation, and then they invented the process for manufacturing paper from the cotton, linen, and rags. The word algebra is derived from the Arabic word al-gabar. The word algorithm is a variant taken from the name of al-Khwarizmi, father of algebra. Well, how are we doing without perennial values being dominated by the algorithm? Not too good, right? And the way this Islam's coming in with its apostasy rates will actually be subject to that too. They're not the cure for that. got these papers about the imperative, the extraterrestrial imperative, and how Islam can be used with that. Islam and globalization is the name of one of these papers. How they can use it for this, and the Sufism. It's completely left out. The zero was invented by bin Ahmad in 976. Al-Razi wrote Al-Hawi, one of the 9 volumes constituting the whole library of the Paris Faculty of Medicine in 1935. This contained the first description of eruptive fevers such as smallpox and measles. Ibn Sina's 5-volume Quantum fi Latib, Precepts of Medicine on Physiology, Hygiene, Pathology, and Therapeutics was the basis of medical studies in French and Italian universities for 6 centuries. Ibn al-Haytham, author of the Book of Optics, is regarded as the father of optics, who explained and proved the theory of vision, and was the first to give an exact description of the eye, lenses, and binocular vision. And so we might continue. It ill behooves Westerners to regard Arabs and Muslims as towelheads. To these we owe much that has helped to shape our own great Western high culture, which has itself been brought to decay by those who run the banks, entertainment industry, and media. Maurice Bardeche, a leading French fascist intellectual in post-war France, wrote that, "In the Quran there is something virile, something one can call Roman." So what do you want? Do you want Roman, or do you want Islamic? Because a lot of stuff that's there in the Roman was also degeneracy. You see degeneracy break out very fast in these Muslim countries where we've spread homosexuality to, and where it always pops up in the pedophilia. Is that a eternal good? Aisha? Muhammad Hijab talking about how it's okay to have pedophilia and there's other reasons why we don't engage in it. In 1985, issue 53 of the Journal of the French New Right, Elements wrote favorably of Islam. Boucher writes that it was in this issue of the Elements that Guillaume Fay, future harbinger of Islamophobia, wrote, "No matter what feeling is inspired by the vision of the world conveyed by Islam, the awakening of the Arabo-Islamism constitutes an objectively favorable fact for the destiny of Europe." Of particular interest is that Jean-Marie Le Pen, founder of the Front National, so far from embracing the Islamophobia of some of the Euro right, pointed out that the globalists are seeking a compliant Islamic world that will not resist globalization. We have seen how American diplomacy in France in particular is manipulating Islamic youth. Le Pen stated in an interview with the Arabies, issue 98, "They're provoking French fears of what is commonly called Islamism or Muslim religious activism. The ones who provoke or manipulate these fears, not hesitating to grossly distort Islam's message to make it better fit to their conceptions, do it from a very precise standpoint, that of the globalist utopia and the ideology of human rights, which assumes the destruction of cultural identities and the rejection of transcendence. Their dream is of a sterilized Islam rendered harmless." And I would add Christianity to that. But they also do it by bringing in stronger and belligerent forms of Islam to break down the culture. We just saw this in Paris, France, with the riots over there, where they applied all the Black Lives Matter shit. Le Pen further explained to the Journal of the Youth Wing of Front National, "It's this American hegemony which is in large part hostile to the national idea in general and nations in particular. Among themselves, nationalists share a body of values common to civilizations, whether Christian or even Muslim. These values go from patriotism to respect for the past, from attachment to the soil to love of family, and to all values that flow from them, fellowship, charity, honor, devotion, sacrifice, etc." Well, these are all metaphysical claims, and you have to justify them in something. So it actually matters what God is. We're right back to the Enlightenment that started all this by saying we have the same religion. In Italy in 2003, the media reported that Hassan Bendadoua, professor of Islam and an official of the post-fascist National Alliance led by Gianfranco Fini, stated, "I am a partisan of Fini and Allah. Islam is a religion of the right, and that it honors family values and respect for parents and the ancestors." Likewise, France's Front National has included Islamic officials, such as Le Pen's advisor on Islamic affairs, Sid Ahmed Yahoui, and electoral candidates who see no complication in being French and Muslim, unlike the problematic character in claiming to be a Zionist and a Frenchman, Englishman, or a German. And that's a bigger conflict, right, if you're going to put Israel first. Dr. Boucher explains the rise of Islamophobia among the nationalist right as the result of the propaganda of the evil empire and the pro-American and Zionist networks. Further, As is known, it's favorably viewed in certain nationalist and French nationalist circles to refer in a manner reminiscent of the clash of civilizations to the confrontation between Islam and the free world. That helps sell newspapers and has the enormous advantage of furnishing a simple explanation of the world's complexity, one easily accepted by a movement looking for more for conspiracy theories than political or geopolitical thought. Now, ideas must be put back in their historical context. The source of the clash of civilizations theory goes back to 1990. The Soviet bloc's collapse took away the U.S.'s role of defender of the free world. There was danger for the U.S. in the multipolar world, which they saw replacing the bipolar one. Therefore, a replacement adversary was needed so that America could continue in its role as world policeman. The office of the U.S. Secretary of State, switched therefore from its red theme, mainly Moscow, is orchestrating a worldwide terror network consisting of third world revolutionary Marxist groups, to its green theme, namely that there is a worldwide terror network consisting of revolutionary Islamist groups. At the same time, the U.S. Secretary of State adopted the Lake Doctrine of rogue nations, the majority of which, as if by some strange coincidence, are Muslim. As for these intellectuals who have theorized about the clash of civilizations, you know them both. It's Bernard Lewis and Samuel Huntington. Both insist on the importance of the Zionist entity to the West's resistance, and that introduces a second level of understanding of the anti-Islamist phenomena, i.e. supporters of the Zionist entity have grafted their struggle onto that of the American Party. By developing a gigantic amalgam of Islamism, Islam, violence in North African neighborhoods, obscurantism, attacks on women, etc., they try to make ordinary Frenchmen believe that Paris is in Tel Aviv the troublemaker. I think there's a typo here in the translation. Try to make ordinary Frenchmen believe that in Paris, as in Tel Aviv, the troublemaker, the killer, the terrorist, and the one favoring a return to the Middle Ages is the same, the Arab and the Muslim. And this is definitely used to strike fear. But we already talked about the government is bringing these people in to cause this trouble. And you can't just go make somebody be terrorists while we back these people that we have backed unless they already have some of that belief there. This also removes all agency, just to say the only thing that ever went wrong is the Jews. And we would all be good if it wasn't for the Jews. It takes away all agency and capability of evil. Any real Christian wouldn't think that about their own view. You would see how you can become evil. And what you do as an individual matters. It's not all that matters. I'm not saying all you got to do is, bootstrap yourself up there, boy. You could solve anything, and then the world's yours if you work hard enough. No, that's not true. If you actually have bad ideas and a bad way of living that doesn't support you, and then you have a government who's engaged in sophisticated psyops and deindustrialization of you on purpose and bringing in hostile peoples and massively propagandizing you and giving you a bad education on purpose, that matters and it cannot be ignored. I mean, I'm talking about conspiracy enough, so if somebody wants to try to autistically chop this down to this one point as though I don't want you talking about the elites, you're full of shit and you could stop putting words in my mouth. But there's also that's in coherence with what we actually do as individuals. That matters too at the local and community level and what you actually believe, whether or not your beliefs are true and promote violence like Islam does, which is just useful as a tool to Bolton here. It's not about the truth. To say that you're only doing bad things because it's a Jewish conspiracy. You see the same bullshit is propagated among underclass whites, as Theodore Dalrymple has documented in his Life at the Bottom, with the same kind of Marxist and capitalist bullshit that's become leftism. You could just take the word black, the way we use it in America, and racism, and then put in underclass and working class, and then they make the same exact excuses for people that don't take care of their children, that beat their women and stab each other in the streets and are high on drugs all day and on welfare all day and pissing in their elevators and their projects. Same shit. But this conspiracy operates on removing your agency and your ability to achieve your norms and be a decent person and to live by the virtues. You have to cohere. So to say this is only because of the Jews, or that they didn't have these ideas in Europe before America got involved, if we look back to the French Revolution, we look to the outbreak of the Kabbalism, though they did, and it often mixed with Islam. Even when Islam had no power, it would often mix with it when they wanted to take those esoteric ideas and mysticism. The Jews definitely took advantage of that, but it's not just the Jews that are here in the elites either. This is all in the service of Satan, first of all, and falsehood. Then it's our own stupid ideas and our philosophy that's wrong. And then it's these elites. And the Jews are just one of them. And you're going to trade them for Arabic elites and fascist elites for the left-wing elites. And it's not going to end well. Because you're not true. You're liars. And now they're bringing the Marxism into this. They're syncretizing this type of fascist case with the Marxist case. And saying, no, that's the one that's based Stalin. We're going to get into that too at the end of this in detail. We'll go through Hinkle's videos and all this fucking bullshit. We'll get into some of the martyrs and saints that these Muslims have killed. We get into hijab, advocating pedophilia, because these people are liars. There's a lot that's true in here that nobody else will talk about with these Jews. But they're leaving shit out and playing a game of bullshit here. And, you know, you're not just going to get rid of the Jews and then the whole world's going to be in peace. That completely neglects human nature and the evil in the heart of man. Even within Islam, there's more insight than that. Hence, factions of the right, having molded a career out of following the U.S. Pied Piper of anti-Sovietism, supposedly in defense of the Western civilizations, have exchanged this mantle for that of anti-Islamism. Boucher explains they were militant anti-communists when the USA had to justify its occupation of our continent by citing the danger of the Red Army. Now they're militant anti-Islamists when the USA had to justify its worldwide ambitions. And you do see, I agree with a lot of this criticism right here. You're seeing all these people that are so hard against the left, but as soon as Israel's involved, we got to stop communism. As soon as it's the Muslim terrorists, we got to go back into neoconservatism. But we were starting to get smart and say we got to get out of Ukraine, right? These wars are taking our freedom, they're indenturing us. Then as soon as it's the Muslim savages and Israel, our greatest ally and our Christian duty, half of the right has gone full retard again. Certain paradoxes appear, such as the anti-Islamism that was spawned by homosexuals such as Holland's Pim Fortuyn, or the radical feminism that is implied in attacks on Muslim traditions. There is a spectacle of the so-called extreme right, English Defence League, demonstrating against the building of mosques in Britain, parading with the Israeli flag and the rainbow flag of homosexual activism. Now, you could make a legitimate case here that Islam is against homosexuality, but you're seeing how quick there's this degeneracy there with Muhammad hijab, putting up posts about golden showers and on your knees, gimp, and how quickly this LGBTQ and leftism has spread into Islam with very little contact in the West in a very short amount of time. We're also seeing people like Andrew Tate talking about how it's all right to have sex with a tranny, as long as they're good looking, and how Sneeko, his type of Islam, it's spreading very quick. To say this is going to completely stop it, while so many elites also want their form of Islam and want syncretism very clearly here. I mean, it's kind of short-sighted and a double standard here where they're not really getting into their own issues. I think it's a pretty false premise that this is going to stop it. You also saw like Richard Spencer and stuff being put into the alt-right. You're seeing this Marxism now with Has. I don't see it really stopping these issues. They're going to blend them together with the same dialectical strategy he was talking about. So, rainbow flag of homosexual activism, or Holland's Geert Wilders, who worked for a kibbutz in his youth, calling Jerusalem the cradle of Judeo-Christian civilization. Yet Zionism will never support the national right in its struggle for a resurgent Europe and a Western culture. Zionism demands that the Jew, wherever he resides in diaspora throughout the world, places his loyalty to Israel first. Yet Zionism will never support the nationalist right in its struggle for a resurgent Europe and Western culture. Zionism demands that the Jew, wherever he resides in diaspora throughout the world, places his loyalty to Israel first. In 1975, Nahum Goldman, a longtime World Zionist leader, declared unequivocally for the World Jewish Congress at Jerusalem. At the time of crisis for Israel, when its policies are rejected by many countries in which Jews live, conflict is bound to occur. The only solution is to acknowledge the existence and fight for recognition of double loyalties. The real test of our solidarity with Israel will come when we support it against the views of the states in which we live. Let me read that part again. The real test of our solidarity with Israel will come when we support it against the views of the states in which we live. Hence, any form of nationalism other than that of the Jewish is anathema to Zionism, and the Zionists have fought tooth and nail to support any nationalist resurgences as inimical to Jewish interests. When Senator Joseph McCarthy started to campaign against communist subversion, although he did not address the Jewish issue at all, Zionists saw McCarthyism as the basis for an emerging American nationalism. They were foremost among those who sought his destruction. The response of the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith, a pervasive intelligence gathering and smear-mongering agency, was to embark on one of the earliest campaigns to thwart right-wing extremism by fighting the terrifying plague of McCarthyism. And Jay Dyer's stuff on Operation Mockingbird here is really good, because this McCarthyism was partly in response to the Fabian control and infiltration of our CIA and military-industrial complex, and they used the fourth estate of the media against McCarthy to make this look bad. So there were Zionists involved, but there were also intellectuals from various things who might not have been Zionists, and they would have been a good number of Jewish people within there, because there's a lot of Jewish intellectuals. The Jewish media commented, almost 100% of the names turned up by Senator McCarthy's committee on subversive activities happened to be Jewish. When Rabbi Benjamin Schultz founded the American Jewish League Against Communism, he was universally condemned by the primary Jewish organizations, which issued a joint statement in 1954 under the name of the National Community Relations Advisory Council, representing the American Jewish Committee, American Jewish Congress, Anti-Defamation League, Jewish Labor Committee, Jewish War Veterans, and the Union of American Hebrew Congregations. When the USSR turned against Zionism, Jewish communists became among the staunchest partisans of the U.S. Cold War policies, as we've seen. From this communistic background emerged the misnamed neoconservative movement, which presents loyalty to Zionism as synonymous with loyalty to the USA. The neocons, however, have nothing in common with traditional American conservatism, which eschews American global adventures, including opposing uncritical support for Israel. In order to distinguish genuine American conservatism from the neocons, the Jewish academic Dr. Paul Gottfried, a critic of Israel and Zionism, coined the word paleo-conservative. Paleo-conservatives are bitterly condemned by the neocons and their Zionist backers. When Patrick Buchanan, former aide to Presidents Nixon and Reagan, sought the Republican nomination for presidency in 1992 and 1996, ran for the Reform Party in 2000, he stood on a genuinely conservative platform of opposition to free trade, economic protectionism, opposition to globalization, and support for traditional Christian values. He was vehemently attacked by the Zionists. In 1992, Rabbi Avi Weiss formed the Coalition for Jewish Concerns to disrupt Buchanan's campaign meetings. Buchanan was condemned by both the American Jewish Committee and the American Jewish Congress for stating that his meetings were for Americans by Americans. In response to Rabbi Weiss's activities, in 1999, Abraham Foxman, head of the Anti-Defamation League, stated that Buchanan should be flushed out as dangerous. The American Jewish Congress took out anti-Buchanan newspaper advertisements. Buchanan opined on television interviews that he was being attacked for defending traditional Catholic values. Rabbi Nachum Shifrin, who supported Buchanan, was excommunicated by the Supreme Rabbinical Court of America, calling him a Jewish traitor. This meant that under the Siruv law, a good Jew must not walk within 12 feet of the excommunicated individual, count him for religious activities, or accord him any honors within the Jewish community, or transact business with him. When Australian politician Pauline Hanson, a naive woman who knew nothing of Jews or Zionism, formed her mildly conservative One Nation Party, even this received the damnation of Zionism. The Australian/Israel Review published the names of 2,000 members of Hanson's party, which they had acquired illegally, so they doxed them. The core doctrines of the right, based on what are held to be timeless values and traditions, transcend differences in religion, nationality, and ethne. No, they actually don't. Here, we're right back at what started this all. This is what we see happen in the Enlightenment. Voltaire starts talking about how we all believe the same thing. The Protestants start pushing for this, and this is, if you want to talk about what the Jews did have a role in, once they start to break out and gain power through banking and stuff, they funded Calvin in the capital of Geneva. And it started before money became more important, before capitalism became more important. It starts out being that we all supposedly believe the same thing and have these abstract ideas of virtue with nothing to ground them in, except an abstract God concept, because it's easier to do business with each other. And of course, people who were oppressed for being Jewish and thought to have their religion be false were very much on board with up-leveling these types of ideas. And the intellectuals and the humanists and the people who wanted to cut the Bible down to size and turn it into a tool or an abstraction or get rid of it, well, they liked these ideas, and they also seized upon Jewish ideas and Muslim ideas and esoteric ideas. You want to talk about the lodge and the synagogue having ties to each other. Well, you also have Rosicrucianism here. This comes out of the Enlightenment, this idea that we all believe the same thing and these values transcend the differences in religion. God transcends that. This is the essences and energy distinction, actually, is that what we see as true in each religion that is a permanent value, that is above it, is still below God, and it's distinct from him. It's not all the same God. You're not looking at the same referent. And our apologists can defend this position. Even the ones that are somewhat political can defend this position. This is the idea that Justin Martyr has of logos spermaticos, where the energies of God permeate the world, and any functioning society has to engage with these virtues. Even a Muslim defending his culture against degeneracy. Any society that's going to work, even the pagan societies had noble pagans in them, but they were still wrong, and they ended up in degeneracy, depopulation. The Romans ended up having things like the rape of women by giraffes in their Colosseum. Those aren't eternal virtues. That was demonic. So these powers and principalities, to be seen as good, have to tempt you with the good. And there definitely is virtues that do transcend just a religion, but Christ didn't bring a religion. He brought the fulfillment of revelation. One of these religions is true. The rest of them are false. They cannot all be true. If we want to get into what we're going to talk about, Taoism, Fr Seraphim Rose was a incredible scholar of Taoism. He worked under Alan Watts and rejected him as New Age and realized he was full of it after 10 years of being an Orientalist. And then he went under Ji Ming Shen. And he studied for 10 years under a traditionalist Taoist and saw the commonalities with Christianity, but saw that orthodoxy was true. And his spiritual son wrote a book called Christ the Eternal Tao that is an amazing book that gives them the benefit of the doubt of what they are right about, cuts out what's wrong, and subordinates it to Christianity. But you have everything there that is amazing and insightful. So we don't actually reject the truths that are there. We point out how they were slightly mistaken, but we look at the insights those people had into God's creation, and that we defeat them apologetically as Orthodoxy did to the Greeks, and then transfigured and baptized what was still left and used that language and put it in there. You can see this is the idea we have too that Paul talks about when he faces the men in Athens and talks about the unknown God of the philosophers, and says that they were looking at God, but God was lost after Babel when God mixed up the whole world into multiple peoples for trying to bring God down to their level and take control of him. He left them to the spirits. There's even hints of this about Kronos in Plato, where they talk about 70 spirits being left in charge of the world after Kronos punishes the world. So these ideas are preceded, and you can see certain characters point towards Noah's Ark in the Chinese language. And there's more of that in those books. I'm not going to get too far into that, but you could look at that. I got a playlist on truth in other religions up on my YouTube you can go into that gets very deep into this. Also, the first several episodes of The Lord of Spirits and the episode on the giants all get into this. Everyone talks about the Canaanites. Well, they were given war by the Israelites because they were a bunch of demon worshippers doing human sacrifice. Now, maybe the synagogue of Satan might have inverted themselves and turned into what they hate and what they had justification against. But if you look at Hammurabi's tablet, he claims to have antediluvian knowledge, which would be from the Nephilim shit that was going down when they were summoning spirits and gaining new techne that man was not ready to handle. Same case I was just making about the Arabs. So that is why a German National Socialist such as Johannes von Leers could convert to Islam, or a French traditionalist such as René Guénon. That is how the Italian philosopher Julius Evola could introduce Eastern religions and philosophies to the West, while being among the foremost heralds of a resurgent West. And you see a lot of those Greek ideas with Julius Evola are there with those P2 lodges that we talked about and all the homosexuality, and it's very much in line with what the elites are up to. How the fascist American poet Ezra Pound could also be an admirer of Confucianism and translator of Chinese texts, or the British author D.H. Lawrence could see the atavism of the Aztec Mexicans as having something to teach the West in its epoch of decay. We also see him push a lot of degeneracy. He's a favorite of James Hillman. There's a raging leftist with these Greek ideas. The real clash of civilizations is not between the West and Islam, but between traditionalists, the right of all nations, races, and religions, against the social and moral pathology of the USA and the Latter-day Pharisees. So, not a supporter of the Latter-day Pharisees. I am a very vehement opponent of them. We have much better arguments against them than you do. You don't even have a justification to say they're wrong against God when you're treating God as though he's the same thing in the fucking pagans as he is in Islam and as he is in Christianity selectively. It's just arbitrary shit. You can't actually ground it, and you can't actually win the debate. We can actually defeat this argument. We can defeat these stupid Protestants. We're kept out, and we have people on your end that are trying to seize our narrative and shut us out of here. And you're wrong. Let's see what Jay Dyer has to say about this stuff with Julius Evola.
Abandon. In the practice of sex magic, the goal of erasing oppositions is believed to be effected in the sexual act. Traditionalist philosopher Julius Evola echoes Pike's original comments at the beginning of this.
Pike is the Freemason who wrote Morals and Dogma, which is basically the Bible of the Freemasons. And he believes in an immanentized God based on the natural laws in the world. So you end up in a dialectic and you need to act this out, and you end up in religious phenomenology. That's always these archetypal opposites and dyads. And it ends in the same place as Evola. Evola ends up in a very, very similar place, and it's sex magic, orgies. It's prone to human corruption. And it's a lot like in Romans 1:24, when they forsake the real God, then they end up in their own hedonism and acting out homosexuality, lesbianism, orgies, kind of stuff we see in the Old Testament. And we're seeing it rampant today. So you want to solve this problem, and Kerry Bolton wants to talk about sorcery, but then you end up in the same place again here with Evola you're advocating. And you don't really care about what the religion is. It's just a sociological reduction to make it right-wing. But you're just the opposite of what the fuck they're doing on the left.
Chapter, and explains that the attempt to overcome dualities and the affecting of the psychosphere through such actions is the purpose of this occult working. Sexes is a special method of manifestation of the dyad principle, which also conditions the division between spiritual and nature, ego and non-ego. If there exists a metaphysical coincidence, as we have seen, as John Scotus Erigena recognized it, then there may well be a relationship between the experience of transcendence through sex and a non-dual state that permits a direct extra-normal action on the non-ego.
So they think this action is going to actually lead to something in reality and give them something special. And even ones that don't actually really believe this find it useful for blackmailing purposes. And you want to talk about the Kabbalism and the sorcery of the Jews and the Zionists, and here it is in the pagans. And you arrive at similar structures. You arrive in similar structures in the Chinese alchemy and the places where they allow pedophilia to this day. So you haven't quite solved this problem. And then when you see this stuff in Rosicrucianism, before the Jews had power, you can't quite blame it all on them, nor same with the Italian merchant class that got into all this stuff. It's a structure that the Gnostic impulse seeks. It seeks hermetic structures, and then they're supposed to actually do something. And you keep ending up, there's only so many working presuppositions you can have. So you still end up in this kind of Hegelian type of dialectics, and these right-wing MAGA Marxists are based on that type of metaphysics. So they're still out of the same problem. They haven't fixed it just because they went for Stalinism. And that's where this stuff's going. It's even left to fascism right now and moved into that sphere. Then you get esoteric Islam. Rumi ends up having verses about pedophilia, just like Muhammad Hijab advocates from a more action-oriented and masculine type of angle. You see it with bestiality in Rumi. You see the bestiality that the Romans had. They used to have bestiality on display where they would have women raped by giraffes and other animals. And Uberboyle was crushed in debate with David Patrick Harry from Church of the Eternal Logos on that point. So we keep arriving at these same places. I mean, Commodus, when he was emperor, his wife had a competition for how many men she could sleep with the empire's biggest prostitute, and some insane number of men in one day. So you keep ending up in the same degeneracy, and we keep seeing it on display, but you act like it's just a red herring and it's only the Jews. Well, it's everything that is outside of Christianity, especially since Christ came. And it's always the way these things have to come together in opposition to it, especially as modernity happens and you start having religious syncretism and everything is subject to the economic and technical structure. I mean, that's Marxism is an update of that Gnosticism. So is the transhumanism.
Of the outer web of events. Let us recall that this is the classical Platonic version of the myth of the original hermaphrodite and of a power such that it struck fear into the gods and was attributed to that before being split. So in other words, here's Evola saying that sexual magic is just ancient pagan psychodrama repackaged. But in many ways, it's important to understand this is actually how these cults view their actions. The cults believe that these things are real and that they really do have an effect. So while most people may not understand the world this way due to modern rationalism and scientism, many pagans and occultists do understand the world this way. In regards to the movie's ritual scene, in regards to the magic circle, Evola also writes, here it is a matter of the chakra or the chains or wheels consisting of couples who perform ritual coitus together in circular formation. The middle of the circle is the lord of the wheel, together with his companions who officiate and direct this collective operation. An adept who has had perfect initiation is needed to perform this function. Overall, this is a collective and partly orgiastic evocation of the goddess, the latent force within the group, a force.
And you see this stuff in the Dionysian rites back with the ancient Greeks without any Jews present. And you see it happen with the androgyny and the cross-dressing there. You see it happen with the kind of hermaphroditic ideas that are sometimes in Plato. Plato had advocacy for what he called right pederasty, because if you allowed pederasty with any age, people thought it was evil. He thought if you didn't allow it all, that was bad, and you needed this gnosis of eros and beauty and the youth to move you towards like connection to the forms. And Herbert Marcuse draws from that and says that's the most important part in Plato. And he actually advocates for this in Eros and Civilization, especially you have to get the original edition in print because Kindle removes this part, saying this is the most important part and it should be used to break down the family. So I don't exactly know what you're gonna do, why you're bringing Evola in here, and it's because you're looking at the traditions of all cultures for a militant version of it to blend the paganism with the Abrahamic religions, as though you can make a Chrislam type of syncretism and get everybody on board with this. But it's subordinate to these abstract ideas that will always end up in esoteric phenomenology if you try to make any sense out of them and justify them or engage with them. And it's quite obviously there with a lot of the homosexuality that went on behind the scenes with the Nazi Party. So you're not actually solving the problem. It's really a ridiculous point here to bring this guy in, and a lot of the contradictory points he made in here. And Islam too, you can see where somebody, I think, like Henri Corbin will also go to the Valkyrie or he calls it the Walkürja from the German version, to go back to the Frivertes and the Dhyana and Zoroastrianism to try to reblend these things. So you can have something like Dante's Beatrice, but a warrior version of it. And then you still end up in these pagan religious experiences, which can deceive you. St. Paul says Lucifer can appear as an angel of light, and this is the problem with Muhammad. Muhammad had a vision that his wife actually suspected was demonic, and he didn't have Christ to try the spirits. Any spirit that says they are not in the flesh, that Christ was not God in the flesh and the Son of God and cannot say his name, is a demon. You have no ability or criteria to actually test for demons because they can pretend to be angels. And we've seen the result of this, and the result of Muhammad's schism allowed the schism with the papacy, and that allowed all the esotericism to break out in the Renaissance, and that allowed the Protestant Reformation and Enlightenment, and also the Zionists to take their claim. And Islam is part of this long-range dialectic.
Arouse the realization of acts and visualization of images by the individual pairs until a fluidic or, quote, psychic vortex is created and used in the operation. A similar method performed for the benefit of others is used in professional magic rites. Tantric chakra have been convened by princes for specific purposes, such as propitiation of success in war. So this is the whole idea behind the pagan psychodrama, and this is the worldview of the elites, according to Stanley Kubrick. I think this is correct, and I'm not promoting the works of Julius Evola. I think his critique of the modern world is very insightful and very good. But as you can see, this idea of returning to some ancient pagan psychodrama really is already the worldview of our moneyed elites and is therefore degenerate and destructive.
That's really the main point here. You're trying to stop the elites with similar views to them, and it's the same with the incorporation of Islam. It's the same with this MAGA Marxism that's obviously being pushed for an end of breaking down a true, real religious response to the elites right now, while that is actually possible. Somebody like Hinkle is here to co-opt that and start blending in degen versions of Islam with like Sneeko, Tate, all this shit. I mean, Tate's out here making like Gnostic comics and stuff. It's absurd. Now, here was what Andrew Wilson put up. Muslims aren't friends to the Christian. Many in their rush to condemn Israel have made this error in judgment. Zionists aren't friends to Christians. Many in their rush to condemn Hamas have made this error in judgment. Our path is narrow, our friends are few. This is exactly what it is. Then he's quoting Sierran O. Merchada. On this day 14 years ago, an Orthodox priest was martyred for preaching Christ to Muslims and seeing many converts to the Orthodox Church. By the way, this is also one of the things that inflamed a lot of the persecution in Egypt. Successful converts, and it's quite often what got a lot of our saints killed by Muslims. An enraged Muslim entered this priest's church with a gun and shouted, "Where is this priest Daniel?" People ran out. Father Daniel was behind the icon screen in the altar and could easily have escaped out the side door through the vestry. Instead, he stepped out from the altar into the nave of the church and said, "I am Daniel." And he was shot to death in cold blood in the middle of the church. short, their replacement god, Napoleon. And now we come to the last aspect of the revolution, which is that of Napoleon. With Napoleon, the revolution actually comes to an end. That is, this bloody part. The whole of Europe is convulsed. Half of it is welcoming the revolution until it sees all the blood and begins to get a little upset. But still, many people are welcoming revolution. And another half of it is horrified, and they begin to fight. And the French armies go out beyond the borders, carrying the revolution abroad. They saw how Goethe, Beethoven, and others think it's a wonderful thing, bringing liberty and equality to mankind. And then comes one very talented and clever man, Napoleon, who takes over the whole thing and becomes over 15 years the dictator for France. In many ways, he offers a compromise. That is, he restores the church. In fact, gives the church. He has a concordant with the Pope, which gives the Pope much more power over the French church than he had before. He restores churches. He even restores a new kind of nobility and establishes an empire, a new monarchy, but preserving the advantages of the revolution. That is, he has a new law code. He dissolves the whole idea that there are different castes in society. All are supposed to be equal, at least theoretically, before the law. And we'll look at a few aspects of his life, which are not too often talked about, which were. There's a book by Dmitry Merezhkovsky, a Russian, a crazy Russian, who, however, was very much attuned to Napoleon's mystical ideas. So he quotes from many of his letters. To begin with, he has a frontispiece, the motto for the whole book, a quote from Pushkin, who calls Napoleon the faithful executor of a command unknown. That is, the idea that he is representing something he knows not what. He himself is very aware of being on the crest of some movement in history. And as long as that movement supports him, he can go forward and conquer the world. And when it departs, he feels he loses everything. This Merezhkovsky calls Napoleon the Titan who bridled the chaos, the revolution. He took over and gave it order. There's a Catholic thinker from the 19th century, Leon Bloy, who talks about Napoleon. He says, Napoleon cannot be explained. He is the most inscrutable of men, because he is primarily and above all the prototype of him who must come and who, perhaps, is not far distant. He is the prototype and forerunner, closely akin to us, who among us, Frenchmen or even foreigners, living at the end of the 19th century, but has felt the illimitable sadness of the consummation of this incomparable epoch, who possessed, with but an atom of a soul, but was not overwhelmed by the thought of the verily too sudden downfall of the great empire and its leader, who was not oppressed by the remembrance, but that yesterday, so it seemed, men were on the highest pinnacle possible to humanity, because of the mere presence of this beloved, miraculous and terrible being, the like of whom had never before been seen in the world, and could, like the first human beings in paradise, deem themselves the Lord of all God's creation, and now immediately after must again be cast back into the age-long mud of the Bourbons dynasty, because after Napoleon the monarchy was restored. He, Napoleon, himself speaks of himself as someone who is very much one of the people, even though he was himself from some kind of little nobility. He says popular fiber responds to mine. I come from the ranks of the people, and my voice has influence over them. Great was my material power, he said, but my spiritual power was infinitely greater. It bordered on magic. Look at Tate right now, talking about how he has the powers of mind control. And I wouldn't say he's the same as Napoleon, but it's like we have many little Napoleons now from every ideology. When the people died for Napoleon, they died for someone whom, as Victor Hugo writes, understanding that they were going to die, that they saluted their God who was standing in the midst of the tempest, that is, Napoleon as a deity. On his return to Paris from Elba, that is, when he first was banished to Elba off the coast of France, and then came back for a brief period before Waterloo, he came to the palace of the Tuileries in Paris and said, "Those who carried him were frantic, besides themselves with joy, and thousands of others deemed themselves happy to be able to kiss or even touch the hem of his garments. Methought I was present at Christ's resurrection," says one witness. When I was a child, writes this same Leon Bloy, all knew old veterans who could not distinguish him Napoleon, from the Son of God. Napoleon himself writes in this testament which he left, I die in the Roman apostolical religion, in the bosom of which I was born. And in fact he lived. He was a member of the Roman Catholic Church, but an idea is totally foreign to it. And he said, in fact, I prefer Islam. At least it is not as absurd as our religion. Napoleon is a demoniac being, says Goethe, using the word daimon in its antique pagan sense, neither god nor devil, but someone betwixt the two. There was an apocalyptic strain which runs throughout the whole Napoleonic mystery. It originated earlier still within the Revolution, when at times it reached such a pitch that it was almost akin to the early Christian eschatology, a premonition of the world's approaching end. This, of course, is very accurate because this is a chiliastic movement. The end of all things is at hand. There will be a new heaven and a new earth. The ancient dream of paradise lost, of God's kingdom on earth, is in heaven, together with a new vision of a human kingdom of liberty, equality, and fraternity, drew men towards Napoleon. Napoleon is the soul of the revolution. I am the French Revolution, says he, as he begins the empire, and at the end he says, the empire is the revolution. He was a bad man, an evil man, he says of Rousseau standing over his grave. Without him there would have been no French Revolution. It is true that I, too, would not have existed. Perhaps that would have been better for the happiness of France. Your Rousseau is a madman. It is he who has brought me to this. Time will show whether it would not have been better for the peace of the world if neither Rousseau nor I had lived. Still, he was very much the spokesman of the revolution. He says of himself, I closed up the chasm of anarchy. I put an end to the chaos. I cleansed the revolution. In spite of all its atrocities, the revolution was the true cause of our moral regeneration. Thus the most foul-smelling manure produces the most noble vegetation. Men may restrain or temporarily suppress this progress, but are powerless to crush it. Nothing can destroy or efface the great principles of the revolution. Its sublime truths will endure forever in the light of the wonderful deeds we have done, and the halo of glory with which we surrounded them. Already they are immortal. They live in Great Britain, shed their light in America, and that's where we get this strain of Jacobinism from, whether it's in the wokeness or the neocons, which is what I was getting into in the previous chapter when I read the Collins brothers in the neocon chapter on Anders Breivik. They live in Great Britain, shed their light in America, have become the heritage of the French nation. They are the torch which will illuminate the world. They will become the religion of all nations. And, say what you will, this new epoch will be associated with my name, because I kindled a torch and shed a light on its beginnings, and now through persecution, I will be forever acclaimed as its Messiah. Friends and foes alike will call me the first soldier of the revolution, its champion leader. When I am no more, I shall remain for all nations the beacon star in their rights, and my name will be their battle cry, the slogan of their hopes. As to the dichotomy between liberty and equality, which, as anyone knows, exclude each other, he says, better abolish liberty than equality. It is the spirit of the times, and I wish to be a son of my times. Liberty is the need of the few elect. It can be constrained with impunity, but equality is pleasing to the majority. This Merezkovsky quite rightly notes that the revolution seceded from Christianity in everything, save in the idea of universality. Dostoevsky writes, as a matter of fact, the French Revolution was nothing more than the last variation and reincarnation of the same ancient Roman formula of universal unity, which, by the way, we discovered earlier is one of the main themes of modern thought. And this whole Hinkle movement, you're seeing all this ecumenism to this universality, and one of the big guys that's pushing it uses Stoic ideas, which become very easily perennialist. And one of the reasons that they persecuted the Christians with the Romans is that they would not be cosmopolitan, because we see God as the one true thing that there is, so we cannot blend it with other religions. And he wanted to march on Asia. Before he became emperor, he was in Egypt, and he came back to take over France. For him, Europe was but the route to Asia. He said, Europe is a molehill. Only in the east have there been great empires and mighty upheavals. In the eastward dwell 600 million people. The lure of the east, says this Merezkovsky, grips him all his life. In Egypt before the Syrian campaign, young General Bonaparte, pouring for hours on the ground over huge outspread maps, dreams of a march to India across Mesopotamia following the route of Alexander the Great. He says, with overwhelming forces, I shall enter Constantinople, overthrow the Sultan, and found the new and great empire of the Orient. This will bring me immortal fame. Now we see how he surrounds himself with a mysticism. At St. Helena's, when he's in final exile, he says, I always realized the necessity of mystery. I always realized that my ends would be the best served by surrounding myself with a halo of mystery, which has such a strong fascination to the multitude. It fires the imagination, paves the way for those brilliant and dramatic effects which give one such power over men. This was the cause of my unfortunate march to Moscow. Had I been more deliberate, I might have averted every evil eye. But I could not delay it. It was necessary that my movement and success should seem, as it were, supernatural. So you see what's behind some of his gambit to go to Moscow, to go into Russia. He needs to be like a god. And about religion, he says, I created a new religion. Already I pictured myself on the road to Asia, riding on an elephant with a turban on my head and carrying a new Al-Quran written by myself, a new sacred book. See this desire right here to write a new Quran because it fits logic and he likes this idea. It's a man-made religion, like Muhammad's. Napoleon realized that, as he said, as soon as a man becomes king, he is a separate being from his fellow men. I always admired Alexander the Great's sound political instinct which prompted him to proclaim his divine origin. Had I returned from Moscow, he says, as a conqueror, I should have had the world at my feet. All nations would have admired and blessed me. I might have withdrawn myself mysteriously from the world, and popular credulity would have revived the fable of Romulus. It would have said that I had been carried up to heaven and taken my place among the gods. He realized that our life and time were not appropriate for calling himself God. He says, now were I to declare myself the Son of the Father Almighty and order a Thanksgiving service on the occasion, every fishwife in Paris would jeer at my face. No, the people are too civilized nowadays. There is nothing great left for me to do. He used the Catholic faith, as he himself says. Would you like me to invent some new and unknown religion according to my fantasy? No, I hold a different view on the matter. I need the old Catholic faith. It alone retains its grip on all hearts, and alone can turn the hearts of the people towards me and remove all obstacles from my path. But on St. Helena, he notes that he had aims beyond conquering the world. He says, I should have governed the religions with the same faculty as the political world. I intended to exalt the Pope beyond measure, to surround him with grandeur and honors. I should have succeeded in suppressing all this anxiety, for the loss of his temporal power. I should have made an idol of him. He would have remained near my person. Paris would have become the capital of Christendom, and I should have governed the religious as well as the political world. And we see this now with the Pope, who's basically the WEF Pope, blending with other religions, but still trumpeted around. This is what Dostoevsky also predicted would happen in his Grand Inquisitor when man rejects the harder path and the truth for something that will give him worldly bread and solve his problems. And the Catholic Church has said will be a religion of Antichrist. And this is immediately after the issues of theodicy, when Ivan Karamazov cannot accept the evil in the world and hates God for it. Doesn't even say he doesn't believe in him. He says he rejects him because of allowing such things. Thinks his justice is better. Then we immediately segue into Antichrist. These movements that would rather have a religion that does what they want instead of truth are about the same thing. And if things get bad enough, people will do anything to have order restored to the chaos and somebody to make peace. The Antichrist is a peacemaker. And so we see some of these mystical ideas of Napoleon and other important things. We have in him the first time in the modern age a world conqueror, someone who consciously wanted to conquer the world and even perhaps sets himself up as a god. And this is a pattern that goes back to like Nimrod and Babel. He saw himself as the successor of the Roman Empire. After he defeated the Russians at Austerlitz in 1807 and the Germans in 1806. In fact, the Germans were so afraid that he would take the crown of the Holy Roman Empire that the Emperor of Austria abolished the Holy Roman Empire in 1806. Napoleon announced in 1807, after defeating the Russians, that I am now the Roman Emperor because I have defeated the First Rome, the Holy Roman Empire, and the Third Rome, which is Moscow, and I am now heir to both. And the third aspect of his attitude towards the Jews. The age of revolution was preceded immediately by much agitation in favor of the Jews, especially on the part of a very enlightened Jewish philosophers like Moses Mendelssohn, and the liberal radical Jews who wanted to abolish the separate ghettos and so forth. In fact, the revolution gave a great deal of so-called freedom to the Jews. In every place, the revolution is usually accompanied by the emancipation of the Jews. That we'll go back to that later on, that aspect. The most interesting thing about Napoleon and the Jews is that after he had proclaimed himself emperor, he called from all over the world a meeting of the Sanhedrin, which was the Jewish high court, which condemned Christ to death and had not existed since the time of the fall of Jerusalem after the death of Christ. It wasn't the Jews that called this, it was Napoleon. He called back this organization, and remember, that very day, Herod and Pontius Pilate became good friends. He called back this organization into existence for one purpose, so that the Jewish people would proclaim him to be the emperor. There's even an illustration of him at the Sanhedrin meeting in order to proclaim him emperor. It is in a book I lost. And what does Ben Shapiro say? We're waiting for a political leader. Give us Barabbas. One asks the question, how these? Certainly there's many enlightened and modern ideas here. He's obviously a child of the Enlightenment. Wonders how this whole idea of an empire, of a monarchy, a restored monarchy, fits with the ideas of the revolution, which is a democracy and the state of equality. How does it fit? And how could he be recognized as the carrier of the revolutionary ideal? In fact, wherever he went, his armies were tremendously enthusiastic. They felt they had an ideology. They were carrying the message of truth to other peoples. Obviously, it's bound up with this chiliastic revolutionary ideal. Dispensationalist. For now, we won't say much more about it. But we find later on other examples of the same phenomenon occurring again. But there are different strands of the revolution, and the strand which Napoleon evoked was this, which we've talked about before, the ideal of universal monarchy, which makes him one of the forerunners of Antichrist. The very thought that he could be proclaimed a god after conquering the world, that he would be conqueror of the world, one world ruler, that he is the Roman emperor, that the Jews proclaim him as emperor, that is, almost Messiah, shows that he has very definitely, more than anyone before him in modern times, is a forerunner of Antichrist. And we will see later that there is one other person so far in the modern history who had a similar function. In fact, almost all these things have the same ideas, and that's Hitler. And the whole revolution, beginning with the proclamation of the rights of man and equality through the bloody massacres and deliberate depopulation, proclamation of communism, and the coming to power of one ruler who wanted to be the ruler of the world. All of this is a rehearsal for a future kingdom of this world. And once Napoleon was removed and the monarchy was restored, we'll see that it was not a real restoration. These revolutionary ideas began to become much more powerful, and the whole of the European intellectual class now becomes filled with these ideas. They change a few ideas, but the basic ideal remains the same. There are some thinkers who go a little deeper into the question. Some are more superficial. We will examine the views of the various ones and also the revolutionary outbreaks which they inspired. But to understand the revolution, we have to see it not as something which is complete in itself, but as something which is an attempt of breaking through of the new forces, the chiliastic forces. Later on, these forces are able to take over most of Europe, but now most of the world, because meanwhile the process of apostasy, of the mystery of iniquity, has gone much deeper and has entered into the lives of now everybody in the world.